Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Tanker Talk, the podcast on Twitch. My name is Josh O'Connor, and I am the producer and one of the hosts, along with these two other guys, of Modiphius Calling Podcast, which is from Modiphius Entertainment. And this is our own thing, Tanker Talk Productions, and we are doing a live series of podcasts. And this is going to be one of them. We're also going to be doing a bunch of actual plays on the channel and contests and game shows and just all kinds of fun stuff. But it all starts out with this. So without any further ado, I'm going to allow my fellows to introduce themselves. Mitch, you want to go first?
Yeah, hello. My name is Mitchell. I am a Twitch streamer on Twitch of Penny for a Tale. Check us out if you ever get an opportunity. I also work with these fellas and playing some games, running some games, diving into some games. I'm a boffer LARPer, a parlor LARPer, a tabletop GM, a regular player. I'm the guy who makes drama, and that is my intro.
That's good.
Cool. I'm Scott. I'm a GM. I have GM'd the official Conan actual play for Modiphius. You can find that over at Modiphius' channel. And for my day job, I'm a researcher in a social psychology lab. So I'm also interested in psychology and the psychology of games.
And that's something that comes up, and something that I like on our podcast is that we actually get into the kind of psychology behind games, and you can bring a lot of that knowledge and sort of and bring some depth to the conversation, which is always good.
Yeah.
So the first thing we're going to do is we have a segment called What Y'all Playin', and we talk about any game that happens to be on our tabletop. And so we're going to do that. Scott, why don't you tell us about the game you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, so I want to talk to you guys about Masks: A New Generation. Josh, I know you've had a chance to play it. Mitch, I know you're kind of familiar with it, right?
I have them all on PDFs. I have played it one time, not one time, but I played about 8 times. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so this is a Powered by the Apocalypse superhero game, but it has a twist. It's not just a game where you play any old superhero. It's a game where you play teenage superheroes who are trying to find their identities in the world. So you play, and it has a really well-established setting called Halcyon City, in which it's this city that's sort of this idealized superhero city where heroes are kind of not every day, but they're integrated into the city. Everybody knows what they are. There's this long history of heroes from different generations. And your characters are part of the new generation. And you sort of come in onto this scene where you have characters who are mentor characters or parents or whatever who might be heroes or might have ties to heroes. And they all sort of have different ideas of what your characters want to be. And the reason that I really like it is because it's a game not really about, punching people and stopping supervillains. It's definitely about that. But what it's really about at its core is about sort of drama and identity and what it's like to be a teenager in a world that sort of wants you to be all kinds of different things and how you make sense of that. And it has some really awesome mechanics to reflect this. There's this thing that I love where for each of your stats, it's built on this sliding scale. And as people around you, usually adults, interact with you, they can kind of push you one way or the other to say, oh, you're being too crazy, you need to mellow out, or oh, you need to be more tough and be more violent on people. You can choose to accept or reject this influence that actually changes the stats of your character. So your character is shaped by those around you. So it's not just about a character in a vacuum sort of asserting their will on the world. It's about this deep interconnected web of relationships with your character that sort of evolves through play. And it's a game where you're equally likely to miss a test and break up with your girlfriend as punch Dr. Octopus in the face for robbing a bank. It's just a ton of fun. Josh, you've played it with me.
I had a good time playing the game. I remember that we formed our characters who were pretty much like these kind of teenagers or young adults. And the number one thing we did in the game was we went to a party. It was a big party, and I remember one character didn't like to drink, so he wasn't really interested in it. He was kind of a wallflower at parties. And then another character was really into parties and really into having a good time. I think the character who didn't like to drink he had some kind of psychological superpowers, and he used them to kind of make everybody get really drunk to the point where they were sick.
That was cool. He literally killed the party just from his presence being there. And it was neat because it was this neat sort of metaphor of somebody who's a grump killing the party. He literally did. You get all kinds of stuff like that in Mask, where like the powers represent things that you'd encounter in the real world and sort of through this fantastical lens. So there's a big problem with superhero games, right? Is that you have heroes of immensely different power levels. You have like Iron Man and like the Hulk, and then you also have like Robin or like Black Widow, and people kind of make memes and jokes about this with like, like what is Black Widow gonna do with her gun against like giant aliens from the Avengers when Iron Man can like shoot beams out of his hand, and like that's kind of honestly a problem, right? And I think it's a lot of people see this as a big problem for RPGs. Like, how do you have a character like Robin in the same party as like Superman, right? Clearly they can do vastly different things. And if you have some kind of setup like a traditional tabletop game where the game is based around the powers that you use in combat, it's going to be super unbalanced. So like Superman's going to just steamroll everything, or you balance the encounters against Superman and Robin's just going to get massacred, right? It seems impossible. But Mask does this really elegantly because it bases the mechanics not around the sort of power levels of the character, but around the emotional conflicts of them. And by this, I mean that the roles that you do are less about how you do things, but more about what you want to accomplish. So it's more like if you're trying to assert yourself, you can do this any number of ways. You can do it by shooting like a giant firebolt from your hand and exploding a city block, or you can do it by running over a dude and punching him in the face. Like the game doesn't care really. The fiction cares a lot, but the mechanics like resolve these sorts of things in ways that are agnostic to the sort of fictional thing that's happening. So you can have these different power scales, but still have characters feel like they can do very meaningful things. And in the game that I played basically a Robin character, a person who had no superpowers. And all the other characters played superpowered people. We had somebody who was basically like an Iron Man person with a big souped up suit. We had like a shape-changing person who was basically like, I don't want to say like the Thing, more like Beast Boy, who they could, they look horrific and they could change into other things. And there's somebody who was like this tech, like hacker, like cyber type person. And I was just like some like girl in a costume with like a hoodie who like wanted to go be a superhero. And like that worked fine. It worked great. I served as like the sort of emotional core of the party. And even though I was like kind of like useless in combat, but within the context of the game, I had tons to do and it was a ton of fun. So I really like how Masked addresses this problem of like different power scales by just saying like, hey, it doesn't matter. Like this game is about, I guess, like feelings or drama or personalities. It's not about how strong your laser blast is.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems with superhero games is like when they do focus too much on the mechanics, it's like, okay, we're fighting Rhino and he's got like 300 hit points and we just have to basically, anything you do that isn't reducing his hit point count, the system doesn't really allow you to affect the situation in any other way if you make it too kind of mechanistic like that.
Yeah, so like right now I am playing this game called Vigilante City, which is another superhero game. One of my favorite parts about it is it has a nice balance of mechanics. It's pretty easy, so you can kind of focus on the role play aspects of it. And one of my best games I ran was using the Worm setting, which is a written out story that you can find online, Worm, which focuses on superheroes. Probably the best literature concerning superheroes there ever is, and I'll fight you on that if anyone disagrees. Combine that with the rules of it and have some nice, cool things. I mean, if you're looking at like My Hero Academia, which is one of the best superhero experiences right now, in my opinion, some of the fights have so much drama to it, and that's like something I try to encapsulate in the game, which I think it really depends on the GM and the players. In the system is kind of something you can move about with, especially with superhero. Though in general, I haven't had much fun with mutants and masterminds.
Yeah, I've got a couple versions of that game. I have like the Authority version of it, and I also have the DC Adventures version of it. And it's I don't know, I've paged through it, haven't played it yet, but I think it was basically just 3.5 reskinned.
Tell me about this game, Worm. You've mentioned it before. Yeah,
so it's not a game. It is it's literature published online. It is a superhero web serial about superheroes that they call parahumans. And one of my favorite aspects is it's such a rich world. Like they have these powered superheroes called the World Enders. And all they ever do is every once in a while they come out of nowhere and they destroy a whole city. And the villains and the superheroes have to get together to prevent that. They have to actually work together and have a truce.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, and like no one has been able to destroy a World Ender yet. And you also have like one of their greatest superheroes, a guy who is always saving everyone. He never stops, he never sleeps, he never eats. He's just saving everyone all the time. But no one can connect with him. He's just basically this entity, this force of nature. And then you have your small time heroes, and the web series focuses on Taylor, who can control bugs. And the best part about Worm is that the creative uses of superhero powers. I've never seen me experience like that kind of focused on the different ways and unique creative things you can do with superpowers. And the relationships are great. It's a great story. Check it out. I linked it.
I love this idea that you just said about superheroes and supervillains having to come together to face some threat, because I think a big thing of Masks is you can kind of run it as a villain of the week type of thing. And in the game that I played, we sort of did, but it's really about the evolution of your characters as people. Because of this fact that like your stats get pushed around by people, and as you reach certain thresholds of leveling, you essentially start to solidify your identity. So once you get to, I forget, it's like 5 or 6 advancements, you unlock these new things where you're just like, okay, I'm gonna just set this value right here. So like you have, I forget off the top of my head which the stats are, but it's always a sliding scale between 2 things that are like, one that's sort of good and one that's sort of bad. And oftentimes you have to compromise on things. Like whenever you move something up, you have to move something else down. And so you have to say like, well, maybe I'm not so good at this and that's okay. Or, I'm really strong with this. This is my strength. I'm going to focus on this and just forget everything else. So it's not just about raising everything to the highest, which so many RPGs are about. It's just my character's going to be the best. They're going to be either good at everything or good at this one thing and only do that one thing. It's all about like accepting yourself and figuring out who that is. When I did my character, one of the things I did was like I solidified a sort of middling trait that I had. That was like, I think that I'm about right here on this. I'm not the best at it and I'm not the worst at it. And I think this is not going to change in my character. So I'm going to spend this advance to just set this at, it's like basically at 0, which means it's average. And I think that's really cool that it can make you like, it can make flaws interesting. It makes it interesting to accept a flaw in a character and just say like, I'm going to live with this.
We also played a little bit of City of Mist. I'm really enjoying that as a superhero game.
It's a great game. I usually don't play it as superheroes because while it can be played as superheroes and there's writing within it to play it like that, it runs better as a detective noir with people with, I wouldn't call them superheroes, but more so with these unique abilities.
It kind of sits at a junction between those two things. I mean, if anybody hasn't heard it, do you want to like give a rundown of what City of Mist is?
Yeah, City of Mist is a tabletop RPG made by Son of Oak. And in City of Mist, you are these average people who suddenly have a legend growing inside you. So it could be the legend of Joan of Arc. It could be the legend of hope as a concept. You could be Alice in Wonderland. It's anything you want. And so part of the mystery is kind of figuring out what your legend is and how you relate to it, as well as how you relate to other people. So if Alice in Wonderland encounters the Queen of Hearts, their 2 legends are at odds, but the people who hold the legends might not be. So it's a lot of things going on. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. It has a nice detective noir feel. Every time I play it, I feel like looking out a window with a cigarette. So play it, love it. It's a great game.
I really felt that it was a lot more like a superhero game. I'm looking at the blurb on the Facebook group and it says a super-powered detective game. I definitely felt like my character had superpowers. To me, it felt more like something like maybe Sin City or what else? Like Watchmen or something like that. Like not superpowered guys. I mean, some of the guys in Watchmen have superpowers, but Some of them are just kind of like your Batman and Robin types.
It's that, because in the end, like, I feel like superheroes and other genres kind of mesh together sometimes because, what's a D&D party but a group of superpowered people? The superhero genre is kind of in this weird nebulous area. I mean, if Jessica Jones is a great example, and I would not say that's your typical superhero TV show, even though she has superpowers. It's very much centered around like her relationships and her, the past and how it affects her.
That brings us back to Masks then, because it sounds a lot like that. I mean, but any good superhero TV show isn't just going to be about superheroes. I think there's a lot of movies that kind of get caught up in that. But the ones that are interesting are the ones where the characters have relationships with each other. Mm-hmm. I don't think you get an interesting story of any kind without having that.
I guess my point is that superheroes have kind of gotten to this weird part where it's kind of hard to define. Because what sets it apart from like a D&D group?
That they have superpowers and that they're in our own world as opposed to a fantasy world.
Is World of Darkness vampires? Are they superheroes or supervillains?
They wear eye makeup and they're depressing. That's why they're not superheroes.
Yeah, I mean, the genre, I'm sure, and I'm not an expert. The genre has some similarities that set it apart, but I feel like those similarities have kind of gotten a little bit smaller, especially as people have explored different types of superheroes. So you could have a D20 modern system where you're basically playing a group of adventurers, but could be titled as or looked upon as superheroes. So I think one of the defining features of the superhero genre is the vigilante. I go out and people don't know who I am as I kind of do seek out justice, or I seek to harm people if you're going the supervillain route. And that's something that sets it apart from like the typical fantasy group. I mean, I think what really points it out is Pathfinder has a class called the Vigilante, which is a superhero class. And what really sets it apart is that you're someone who fights crime, but you don't let people see who you are. Your important aspect of it is keeping who you are secret. Which, in superhero genre is a pretty like even level thing across all the board, from Superman to Spider-Man to everything else.
That's interesting. So do they have mechanics for running your daily life? Do you still have to like run a law firm or like manage a billionaire business too?
I mean, there's always rules for everything in Pathfinder. There are books that would, if tossed at you, would squish you. But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is that you have these two personas. You have your social, like, Clark Kent persona, and then you have your superhero persona where you put on the mask, you don a thing, and you get this incredible bonus to disguise, and they're like, "Who's that?" And you're like, "Hi, I'm the superhero." Bam.
I mean, I think another thing that's happened with superhero fiction is that in the 2000s stuff, we started seeing a lot of comic books that were just kind of like regular people. I mean, the TV show Heroes is a great example. So, I mean, you were talking earlier about the lines blurring between, or the definition of superhero expanding. And I definitely can see that. I think that when I want to play a superheroes game, I want to play a regular person who is going through the experience of discovering that they have powers. Kind of like the origin story type thing. And doing it more like Heroes, where it's like just regular folks, and they may hide their identities and stuff like that, but it's it's still low level and that kind of thing, low power level. I think it's interesting because it brings in all the different social factors that would happen. The Tick is doing this really well right now with Arthur's character, and how he's got a family, and then they're like, his mom is like, "God, what are you doing? Are you eating well? Are you being safe?" And then his sister is starting to become a superhero, and so but the family relationships are the big deal there.
Some of my favorite parts of superhero movies are the first half of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, where he's like getting his powers and figuring out how to use them, and you see him like screwing it up and going through everyday stuff with it. Like, that's awesome because it's so relatable, right?
So I mean, like when we talk about City of Mist, I mean, I don't know what the functional thing would be. Is if Mitch, you say you don't really run it as a superhero game, you run it kind of as a detective game. I mean, to me, being in it, I would still see it as a superhero game, I guess, with this broader definition of superheroes that we have today.
Yeah, I mean, people view it like differently. The first group I viewed it more like a detective noir, and when I played with you guys were like, "Oh, superheroes," and I'm like, I didn't think that was something I'd play in this or run. It was interesting.
Interesting. Those kind of sound like different levels of description, right? Because detective noir sounds more like what you physically do in the game, and then superhero is just more like a description of something like tone or like. But like,
I mean,
it's
like
more about
Batman
tone.
has a noir tone, right?
Yeah, I mean, Batman's a detective, right?
Yeah, he's
The world's
absolutely a
greatest
detective,
detective.
and it's absolutely a noir setting too.
And I think the main thing is how the people I mean interact and stuff like that. I mean for the superhero games, you guys viewed it as a superhero game, so there was a lot of notions of what it should be like based on that. Baby.
Yeah, we have a baby. Don't worry, it's in the title.
Yeah.
So
While like a detective noir, I mean, you could almost view it as like a World of Darkness game, where you know, most of the time you're you're kind of dealing with this kind of dark overtone, and you know, once again, the lines are blurred because what's the difference between a World of Darkness character who has these superpowers and a superhero also exploring a kind of a dark setting?
A couple months ago, I went to a psychology conference, and there was something that one of the people talked about, where there was a finding that found that the lyrics in pop songs over the last about, I guess, 100 years have decreased in their diversity, meaning lyrics are getting more repetitive in like about the last 2 decades compared to the rest of the history of pop. So like, you know, a few decades ago, we had stuff like Eric Clapton. Now we have stuff like Kesha and Gucci Gang. And they argued that a reason this could be is because nowadays we have, because of like the internet and smartphones, we're really information oversaturated. We have so many things competing for our attention that for something to be meaningful to us, or for us to like even remember it or pay attention to it, it needs to be really simple and repetitive. Something that can like stick in our minds. If something is more nuanced or takes more time to get into, people are more likely to dismiss it or forget about it or not get into it. So my question I want to bring to you guys is, do you think this is true for tabletop games? I think that generally, if you look at older games from 20, 30 years ago, they tended to be more wordy and be harder to get into. Character creation would take probably a lot longer. And nowadays, certainly those older games still exist, but there's a new uptick in sort of like streamlined, rules light, you know, pick up and play type games. And I wonder if you guys think that this is a trend that's relevant to tabletop games, and if so, if big wordy games are going the way of the dodo.
well, I will say first that while there is a trend in lighter role-playing games and in going back to the very simple old school games of our youth, there's also a trend towards the enormous core book, the 450-page core book specifically, since books tend to be pretty consistent in the number of pages you can have. You know, you're either 128 or 256 or, you know, up to like 450 or whatever it is. I think it started with Star Wars Fantasy Flight, which came out with these 3 great big, not just one, but 3 great big, heavy, probably 5-pound books that had 450 pages. And then a lot of the releases from Modiphius have followed suit. Infinity, Conan, and then City of Mist. It seems like a game ain't a game, especially with Kickstarter and stuff like that, with wanting to offer people more value. It seems like a game ain't a game unless it's really big. So I'm going to say that there are 2 trends in role-playing right now, which is the great big heavy core book and sort of like maybe on your indie side, kind of like some light games.
Yeah. So do you think it is a trend that games are getting less wordy, and do you think it's a trend that's likely to continue, or do you think it's, as Josh says, that they're sort of splintering into 2 different types of appeals, or maybe you have other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's really on preference. It's like, yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen from like D&D, Wizard of the Coast, and Piezo is that people still enjoy a you know, at least a decent a mechanical set. I mean, we just got done playing RuneQuest, and that is a mechanically heavy game.
Yeah.
It kind of fools you with the percentile system, but there's some meat on that bone.
Yeah, I was really surprised about that because Call of Cthulhu is really such a light system that you don't even really need the book to play, because you can fit all the rules in your head and figure out a percentage for anything. I was surprised that RuneQuest was quite a bit heavier than that.
It really comes down to preference, because as you move more towards the rules light systems, the less your action matters mechanically. Well, While on the opposite end, the more mechanics you have, the more choices you have, the more, at least mechanically.
Wait, I'm going to dispute that there because we played, for example, Rangers of Shadow Deep, which is very rules light, but your actions are crucially important. And when you play like a Dungeon World or Powered by the Apocalypse game, it's just that there aren't a lot of rules describing the exact way that you do things. But your action, actually, I think, has way more impact than I hit it with my sword, oh, I missed, or oh, I hit it, I did 10 points of damage. Like, you could change the entire battle with a move in those systems. What do you think, Scott?
I think Mitchell's arguing mechanically. I wonder how. Maybe there's a distinction here between mechanic and fiction. Could you say a little more about it, Mitchell?
Yeah, so in a Apocalypse World system or a rules light system, I try to do something. What I do is the same as someone else trying to do something completely different, generally, especially in like combat or something like that. You're doing the same roles. So narratively, it's very different, but mechanically, it's the same.
So what's the problem?
Well, that means that there is no mechanical difference between our two characters. There is less options mechanically. While in more heavier combat systems or heavier systems in general, because there are mechanics to do specific things, there is a mechanical difference between how you approach a subject and how I approach a subject.
Sure, but why is that better? Because, I mean, there was an article written by, I think, Simon at Pelgrane Press, who said, what everybody does in a game of Trail of Cthulhu, it doesn't matter how you do it, every action is equivalent, which led Graham Walmsley to then say, fine, I'm throwing out skills, and you're just going to roll to do whatever it is you want to do, the same D6. But if it narratively it's different, and it has different impact on the game, what's the problem with not having such a granular system?
Because your actions aren't as different.
But they are as different because
No,
the GM, you describe them as different, and the GM assigns different results to what you did.
The mechanical difficulty of narrative systems is that a lot of times it's within the preference of the GM, and the GM's preferences change. And then another aspect is that we are doing the same roles. The narrative fiction is very different, but mechanically it's the exact same thing, which is a point. Like, you feel that as a player sometimes when someone is like, I do this thing, and you're like, I do that thing. We've done the same thing. There's nothing different about it. I've described it in a different way, but there's nothing different about how we've approached this thing.
Some people see it as hand wavy, right? Is to say, oh, well, the GM will just decide whether it's different. So like, how can I plan for that? How can I make like a big epic thing and feel good about it if I just do the same role everybody else does?
You're talking about I forget what that game was, the Rangers, right?
Rangers of Shadow Deep, yeah.
Yeah, there aren't much tactical options. Compared to other games I've played, there's not much options. You could look at it over and over again, but you were very limited in how you approach a certain situation.
I agree with you.
Other games.
Yeah, I'll say definitely, yeah, there's not. And like, you know, some players don't like to play in a system like that at all. They're like, but they also look at it differently. You know, I mean, if you could consider maybe a game like Pathfinder with all the granularity is kind of more like football, you know, counting every point, every yard, stuff like that. Whereas, you know, maybe a lighter system might be something more like baseball, where, you know, you can hit the ball or you can bunt, or you can get 4 balls. And either way, you can get to your point, which is getting a home run.
I think if you wanted to compare 5e to Pathfinder, with 5e kind of moving more towards the rules light way, there's not much difference in how you approach a stealth test between a rogue and a someone who might not be as good at, like, who doesn't have proficiency in stealth. The points between aren't that much. Primarily because the rules are, I mean, the numbers are a lot smaller, which is a point of simplicity for 5e. While Pathfinder, someone who has dedicated themselves to stealth is vastly different to someone who does not. So how they would approach stealth, you know, it lends itself to a certain, like, I'm really good at stealth. I'm really good at stealth. This is what I do, and I'm good at it. While in other systems, stealth is kind of like, when you're compared to someone who focuses on stealth, the guy who's focused on stealth is slightly better than someone who doesn't focus on stealth.
However, a good GM and a descriptive player could, you know, enforce that in a rules light system. It relies on them. It's not there for you. You have to do it.
Yeah, but then that comes with inconsistency, which is an issue that people have with narrative games at times. is when I play it with this person, it's vastly different when I play with this person, and inconsistency kind of lends to a lack of trust between GMs and players.
I think it can also lead to what you basically described, I think, as a kind of boredom, where you can see the mechanics behind what you're doing, and you're like less than enthralled with them. I'm thinking of a game I played with Scott of Dungeon World, and the problem I had with it was exactly what you said, is that every time it was my turn to do something, I basically could choose to like affect the situation or blood and guts. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there were like there were basically approaches or moves that I could do, and the moves were pretty much equivalent. And for a game that's focused on combat, I found that to be lacking. However, we played Powered by the Apocalypse in a post-apocalyptic setting that was largely about the story of each individual character, and they all had very different ways of influencing situations. And in that case, it was like way more interesting because I was like a gunslinger. So when I tried to influence the situation using that, a very similar move to other players, it was me blasting people with my guns. Whereas somebody else tried to do it, it might have been them trying to reason with people. And so it definitely felt different because the system was not as focused on combat. The system was more about storytelling. So I think the type of game you're trying to play definitely plays a role in that too.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like for narrative systems, combat's okay. It's not great. I much prefer a heavier system like Pathfinder, Shadow of the Demon Lord 5e.
I don't know. I might fight you on that because I mean I think every combat is interesting because of the drama. I mean, I'm a big Star Wars fan, and like the fight at the end of Empire Strikes Back is like probably my favorite fight in cinema history, and it's good because of the drama behind it, because of the build-up, because of the characters. Like what they're physically doing, it doesn't matter. I mean, look at like the terrible fight between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader in the first movie. People make jokes about how bad it is, but it's cool because these characters know each other, and like it's a confrontation. So I mean, maybe if you're interested in like the tactical aspect of it, I could see it, but like I'm of the opinion that if storytelling is what you want, that the drama is where it's at. And while tactics can be fun, I think that they can get in the way of that. So I really love narrative stuff, even if it's combat. And I get your point that sometimes if people are like, yeah, let's have like a big deep fight, that can be pretty cool. But man, like a good drama behind a fight like really makes it, I think, like the best kind of fight.
I'll throw in something too on that, which is that when I do fights, I generally always throw in a tilt. And if I was playing I could imagine if I was playing with a bunch of Pathfinder players and I said, okay, someone set the ship on fire, they might be like, hey, you know, that's not really supposed to happen in the rules, or like, they should make a roll to throw the Greek fire, and then they should make a roll to see how many points of damage is, how many points of structural damage can the ship take, what's the flammability level of stuff, and blah, blah, blah. So like, I can do that in something like Savage Worlds where I'm like, ship's on fire. Everything's changed, you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, it comes that like I would not go that far for a stereotype for Pathfinders. I think when people approach different types of stereotypes in games, like the idea of the power gamer, the idea of a power gamer isn't bad, and people need to get over that. A power gamer can be as much thespian as a thespian. Being good with the rules, being good mechanically has nothing to do with how you approach a game in terms of roleplay.
You have played a lot more Pathfinder than I have. I'm not stereotyping. That was an actual experience with the people I've played Pathfinder with before. It was one group. I don't know if every group is like that.
No. I mean, in the end, Pathfinder players are looking for the story. And there is a story to tell via a mechanical combat. And it kind of... Pathfinder, like every other game, deals with the same like lack of interest that could occur during a fight as a narrative game. I think that more so is the energy that the GM and the players feel and how important the fight is.
Yeah, I can see that. And, you know, also in a system like Pathfinder, it's almost like kind of like you're playing a video game. You're kind of like, well, how good can I do? How good can I do against the Pathfinder system where I'm facing these three orcs, you know, and they have skills, they have hit points, they have weapons, things like that. How, you know, I built my character. I like him. I tried to make him as good as I can. And how well can he stand up? And like, you know, a lot of people will get a kind of satisfaction from that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like fantasy games were originally created for people to feel cool. So
yeah.
Go for it.
I want to bring us back to the main point a little bit. So this idea of our games getting more rules light. So yes, maybe they're sort of, I don't know, fractioning out into like people who like rules heavy stuff and people who like rules light stuff. But it seems to me like as games develop and release subsequent editions, that they tend to get more slimmed down, right? I mean, D&D 5e, I think people can agree is simpler than D&D 3.5.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, 3.5 and 4 were really complex. It wasn't a steady development of the game getting simpler. It was the game got way more complicated through AD&D and then through 3rd edition, 3.5, 4th edition, and then everybody kind of complained about it and it took a dive down.
I feel like for the most part, the bigger IPs have moved towards simplicity. Pathfinder with 2.0, Wizards of the Coast from 4E to 5E. I mean, even Shadowrun got a tiny bit easier. A tiny bit.
It's still the crunchiest game I've ever played.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was 5e that I played.
You just throw dice at people. It's okay.
Yeah, I played it with a group of everybody had never played it before. That was rough.
Yeah. But I'm reading Lexicultum right now by Riot Minds, and it's a pretty mechanically heavy system, at least for combat. And I don't know. Sometimes I get excited to kind of, it's like a fresh of breath air. Wait.
No, we got you.
Yeah.
You got me. So it's nice, But I'm a person who likes the narrative systems, and I also like the heavier systems too. I play Pathfinder, and then I go the next day and I play Shadow of the Demon Lord, and then City of the Mist.
But you pretty vociferously defended crunchy games.
Mm-hmm.
We thought I got kind of the feeling that you prefer them, but I don't know if that's true.
No, I mean I parlor LARPed, and those are like the easiest systems compared to like tabletop games. I like them all. I like City of Mist. I love to death. There are pros and cons for each system. But if I have a good group, it's awesome.
I think that's the bottom line here.
Yeah, I mean, I think in tabletop in general, if you have a great DM, you got great players, it really doesn't matter what you play.
All right. Well, that's all we got time for on this episode, but we're going to be back really soon, in fact, with another episode.